Chapter 17, Tom's Secret Comes Alive. But there were no longer laughter in the little town that same afternoon. Joe and Tom's families were dressing in black. With great grief and many tears, people in the village talked little, but they sighed often. The children could not enjoy their Saturday holiday, for they had no heart in their games and gradually gave them up. In the afternoon, Becky Thatcher found herself near the deserted schoolyard. She felt so very sad. She said to herself, "Oh, if I only had that brass doorknob again, but I haven't anything now to remember him by." And she choked back a little sob. "It was right here," she went on. "Oh, if it weren't to do it all over again, I wouldn't say what I did for the whole world, but he would have gone now, and I'll never, never, never see him any more." This thought broke her down, and she wandered away with tears rolling down her cheeks. Then quite a quiet group of boys and girls came by and stood looking over the school fence and talked about the way Tom did this and Joe did that. Each one pointed out the exact spot that the lost lad stood at that time. Then there was an argument about who saw the dead boys last. The group moved away and at last still their memories of the lost boys in hushed voices. When Sunday school was finished the next morning, the church bells began to toll. Instead of ringing in its usual way, it was a very quiet Sunday, and the sad sound of the bells seemed to keep with the hush that lay upon nature. The villagers began to gather, stopping a moment in the hall to talk in whispers about the sad event, but there was no whispering in the church. All was in silence there. None could remember when the little church had been so full before. There was finally a waiting pause and an unusual quiet. Then Aunt Polly entered, followed by Sid and Mary. The Harper family came next, all dressed in black. All the people and the old ministers rose and stood until the mourners were seated in the front pew. There was another silence that broken at times by muffled sobs. Then the minister spread his hands and prayed. A moving hymn was sung next, and at last the minister began the funeral ceremony. The minister talked so nicely of the lost lads and their good points and their bright futures that everyone there felt ashamed to think that each had seen only the bad things in the poor boys. The preacher told stories from their lives of the missing to show the sweet, kind natures they really had, and the people became more and more moved as the pitiful stories went on, till at last the whole company broke down and joined in the sobs, even the preacher himself, who cried in the pulpit. There was a movement in the gallery which nobody noticed, and a moment later the church door creaked open. The minister raised his streaming eyes above his handkerchief, and what he saw made him stand like a stone. First one, and then another pair of eyes followed the minister's. Then almost with one move, all the people arose and stared while the three dead boys came marching down the aisle. Tom in the lead, Joe next, and Huck in the rear. They had hid in the unused gallery, listening to their own funeral sermon. Aunt Polly, Mary, and the Harpers threw themselves upon their restored ones, smothered them with kisses, and poured them with thanksgiving. Poor Huck stood back, not knowing what to do or even where to hide from so many eyes. He hesitated and then started to move away, but Tom seized him and said, "Aunt Polly, it isn't fair. Somebody's got to be glad to see Huck." "And so they shall. It is glad to see you, my poor motherless thing." And the loving attention Aunt Polly gave Huck made him more uncomfortable than he had been before. Suddenly the minister shouted at the top of his lungs, "Praise God for them who all blessings flow. Sing and put your hearts into it." And sing they did. The song nearly shook the rafters, and as the people left the church, they said it would be a long time before that song would be sung like that again. Tom Sawyer, the pirate, looked around upon the envying young people about him and confessed in his heart that this was the proudest moment of his life. He got more slaps and kisses that day, according to the way Aunt Polly felt, and then he had earned before in his life, and he hardly knew which showed the most, gratefulness to God or the love for himself.